start.
All right, sounds good.
You ever worried though, because of like how we're stuck in quarantine, that we're just gonna eventually run out of things to chat about before we start our episodes?
Dude, honestly, yeah, I feel like the problem with quarantine is, the basis of any like friendship is common experiences and like things that you talk about are like common experiences and also like things going on beyond just like the news cycle, like, oh, like, I was at the store the other day and this really funny thing happened, but now it's just this draining dredge of monotony.
I was
I think some
I was
that was
at
me.
home and I kind of was watching TV and we watched a show or we watched a movie and then we had dinner.
Yeah, that's like every quarantine story now. It's like, hey, this funny thing happened to me the other day where I went to the kitchen and I went to get chips and the chips were out. So I went to the store, could have died, came back, and now I'm eating chips. Like that's like what we're reduced to talking about
I mean, for me, it's like I'm wake up in the morning, do like some sort of like online free trial French classes. After do French grammar, like get into a grammar book and then French grammar, then speak. It's like literally I've been on caffeine from like morning to night.
But what does the French grammar book say? Does it just say like don't pronounce half of these words?
Well, don't
Excuse me,
pronounce.
don't pronounce half of these letters.
Well, don't pronounce if it has a consonant at the end. Don't pronounce it.
Hey, Cameron, how come? Have you tried using Duolingo?
I tried, but it's like I think there are better forms of doing it.
I think Duolingo is really good for practicing a language that you already kind of know.
Yeah, when you already have the basic structures down, it's like reinforcement. I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
But just like I'm on this free trial, the Great Courses Plus, which I recommend. It's a month trial. There's like French lessons, French courses, and stuff like that, like French history stuff. And then I decided to get by the grammar books to kind of get the structure down in my head and structure down writing. Then like the Pimsleur method, which is like speaking and conversations. So it's like I feel like I'm starting to understand way more of it. So that is my quarantine story. And then I mean right now I'm like dying for air because my oldest brother's dog was here. So having cat hair and dog hair.
Oh Jesus!
I think they've been attacking my lungs.
Oh, that sucks.
So like I don't have COVID. But I'm sure if this is like what it feels like, it must be a nightmare.
Yeah, it sounds like if you got COVID, you would not want to be in your place right now because it sounds like it would probably just make it way worse.
Oh yeah, but I mean, I don't have it, and so because it just kind of came out of nowhere. But that's what they all say. That's what. I mean, we can also do some 8-bit.
Some 8-bit sounds.
Some 8-bit histories.
Well, let's get the Final Fantasy victory fact here. Dun 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 dun.
No, we'll do it like they do in the new game. Just have Barrett do it every time you win something.
I'm not gonna
Then we
lie.
wouldn't even have to like talk to the Square Enix music department. We would just talk to like Barrett's voice actor and have him do it for us. I'm sure he could use work right now. I feel like everyone in the entertainment industry could use work right now.
God!
I'm not gonna lie. I felt there was no difference between Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts. I thought they were like one and the same.
I mean, to be fair, it is a
same.
mixture of Final Fantasy and Disney.
Well, at least like Mickey Mouse and like Kingdom Hearts and like Goofy and like, I mean, I don't know. I digress.
Although, sue me, David. Kingdom Hearts has probably the second dumbest weapon ever produced for a Square Enix game.
Oh, I mean, no, I enjoy Kingdom Hearts, but Kingdom Hearts is really dumb.
Like the Keyblade is quite possibly If the gun blade didn't exist, the keyblade might be the dumbest.
Man, my inner like 14-year-old is like, fuck you, the gun blade is really cool, but like the inner older than 14-year-old me is like, no, yeah, it's really fucking stupid. I'm really conflicted right now. I don't know which to side with.
It's an impractical weapon. You'll break your wrist swinging with that thing.
Yeah, but Nick, have you considered the fact that the gun blade looks really cool?
But does it?
All right, Nick, this is getting too hot for me to handle, man.
And it's not just the impracticality of it. It's the fact that they decided that this is the standard weapon of fucking Seed.
Yeah, man. I mean, you know, if you're in an elite mercenary force, don't you want a gun that's gonna like, or excuse me, a gun blade that's gonna like destroy your wrists every time you have to swing it?
Oh God, Mouthful of history. Come for the Final Fantasy controversy. Stay for the history.
Stay for the keyblade.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to drop out of this project if people say the keyblade, or excuse me, the gun blade doesn't look cool. I will concede it's stupid as fuck though.
It looks dumb. I'm sorry, David.
How dare you, Nick? I thought we were friends.
Don't worry. If you're going to drop out, we already have 7 Davids ready to replace you.
God damn. I guess I'll stay for the kids.
All right, you guys ready?
I'd be laughing. I'd be laughing harder, but I can't breathe right now.
Yeah, we don't want to accidentally kill Cameron.
All right, you guys ready?
I'm ready.
All right, welcome back to A Mouthful of History. As always, I'm Nicholas Millett, joined us with me, David Hollingsworth.
What up, y'all?
And Cameron Millage.
How's it going?
This might be our last episode since Cameron is clearly near death.
I mean, it could always be 2/3 of A Mouthful of History. Venerate my position.
Molar's full of history.
It can be a mouth partially full of history.
A chin full of history. A jaw full of history.
All right. As of course, you know, we like talking about history. We like talking about different topics. One thing that I bring into this is that while I did minor in history, my focus and my degree was in film, but history and film always have gone hand in hand. And I thought it would be interesting if every now and then we would talk about a movie that used a historical topic as its basis for the film.
Yep, and so we did a poll among our listeners on our social media pages. And so we asked them if they wanted us to talk about either Dunkirk, Lincoln, or 1917, and Dunkirk was the winner.
Yeah, by a pretty hefty margin, I might add.
Yeah.
Although Lincoln made like a slight resurgence.
Yeah, it did. I think, honestly, though, what helped put Dunkirk over the top was the fact that it was so popular amongst our Facebook people.
Yeah. Well, that 1917 was also like
it got
fairly
one
recent,
vote.
Probably a fairly recent movie. So I think Dunkirk being out in 2017, given like 2.5 years for people to digest it, I think just it was already in the impression of people's minds.
That makes sense.
That seems as good an explanation as any.
Because 1917 was absolutely amazing. It was an amazing film.
Yeah.
I think that just it hit the surprise of all of us. But I just think how many years went by. I think Dunkirk was able to kind of like marinate.
Yeah, and I think it's fair because if there is a movie recently that kind of reminds me of 1917, it's Dunkirk, which eschews a traditional 3-act plot for kind of almost an experience type film.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I thought 1917 was a really good movie, but as I watched it, I couldn't help but think this is really similar to Dunkirk, and in my opinion, Dunkirk did it better.
But I just think that we're hitting a new form of war film nowadays. Dunkirk set the model, and I think a lot more of these war films are going to portray like the average soldier as opposed to like this grand leader leading his malfeasance into war. it's a victory. You know, we're
Yeah, or
seeing
someone being a total badass or something.
Yeah, it takes away from like the glory aspect of it.
Yeah, I think the last of those films was another actually really solid war film that came out in the 2010s. That's Hacksaw Ridge.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that was an interesting one because it was a really traditional hoorah sort of like war film, and yet the main character was a pacifist.
Brilliantly shot, brilliantly directed, obviously brilliantly acted. I actually thought that you could make the argument that Andrew Garfield probably should have won Best Actor that year.
Who did win that year?
Oh God, hold on, let me look that up real quick. I have a bunch of stuff here for it.
Mr. Oscar Man.
Was that 2015?
No, 2016.
2016. Okay.
I mean, Fury was also decent as well. I was a big fan of Fury.
I didn't see Fury.
Yeah, I didn't catch that one either.
Oh, well, damn it. Okay, now I can't even talk about it. Brad Pitt was pretty solid.
I think Brad Pitt is a really underrated actor. And when I say underrated, like, he's a popular A-list celebrity, but I don't think people give him enough credit for his acting ability.
I liked his old school Brad Pitt. Like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Like Fight Club?
Fight Club, like Snatch. Like
I still need to see Snatch. I've always really wanted to see it, but I've just like never had the chance to.
Oh, he plays such a good pikey. If there ever was an archetypal like pikiness. He plays Mickey the Boxer.
Oh, that's right. David Zapper showed me like a couple clips from that movie. It was pretty cool.
That was good. Like I love Guy Ritchie films.
Guy Ritchie is great when he was doing his indie films. Also, I would be lying to you if I said I didn't like both Sherlock Holmes films.
Oh, those were good.
Yeah, those are fun.
Then he does shit like Aladdin.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably got a lot of money for it though.
Yeah. By the way, the winner that year for Best Actor was Casey Affleck.
Whoa! That's the lesser Affleck.
Wait, what movie was he in?
Manchester by the Sea.
Never saw it.
Boring as hell. And look, I don't know where it became okay. We're getting a little off topic, but whatever. I don't know where it became okay so that when a person is like sad and dealing with a tragedy, they're just, the default is that they're distant and they're no emotion and they're just kind of stone-faced. Like, that's become the standard. It's the same reason why the hard-ass CIA agent that, what's her name, plays in Zero Dark 30,
Jessica Chastain
doesn't work, because it's like they decided that hard-ass, tough women equals no emotion.
Yeah, no emotion, bordering between like not doing anything and just kind of like brooding, but like a boring brood.
Here's the thing. It's easier for anybody to walk into the world of masculinity than to go the other way. These masculine traits are very much more like considered quote unquote desirable, even though it's not by any means desirable. So then it kind of shows like it's easier to walk into the world of masculinity than it is to go the other direction, which is femininity. And so that's my take.
That's a solid take. But anyway, we're here to talk about Dunkirk.
Oh yeah, that's right. We're talking about Dunkirk.
So Dunkirk, released in 2017 by filmmaker Christopher Nolan, famous for the Dark Knight trilogy and Inception, and quite honestly, all his movies. I'm a big fan. I'm no shame. The only movie of his, I haven't even finished it, but I wasn't really enjoying it, was Insomnia.
I've never seen that one.
It's actually the only movie he's made that he didn't write.
So we can give him a pass.
For me, I've seen Memento, The Prestige, and then everything after. So like the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, and of course Dunkirk.
And God willing, Tenet later this year.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
So it released in 2017. It's based on the evacuation of Dunkirk, where the British and French soldiers were pushed to the beach as the Germans were basically just finishing up their conquering of France.
And basically it becomes like it's a life or death situation. They know the Nazis are closing in. And so they're trying to find a way to make sure everyone gets off the beach. At least most soldiers get off the beach. And they're getting hammered by the Luftwaffe, which you don't see really in the film.
No, you see it briefly, but we'll get to that. Actually, a thing that was criticized on the movie by certain people, it wasn't a heavy, like loud criticism, is that we actually never really see the Germans at all.
I thought that was really effective. I feel like the movie kind of treats war violence less as like this really awesome, cool spectacle, and kind of more like a
horror
horror
villain.
movie monster in a way, where like the soldiers are all just trying to stay alive, and you really, because of the way everything is masterfully shot and the way everyone is just scrambling to try to stay alive. I mean, I feel like it's really effective in making you empathize with the people in that situation.
Well, I think just having the Nazis be like this invisible enemy, it creates that like suspense, that anxiety. And I agree with David, they were shot super effectively. It's like this enemy you can't see. The thing is, like, they're right there.
Yep.
And then when you hear the sounds of the Luftwaffe come in, they're like, oh crap, they're doing another strafing run. Like, I think it was shot super effectively.
Yeah, you see it, like that scene on the bridge. They used it in the trailer, and it was actually a brilliant trailer of like you see the soldiers standing on the bridge, and they're just kind of like packed in, and then you hear the airplane come in. Then you see the soldiers like almost all at once turn, and like we can't see what they're looking at. We know what they're looking at, but you slowly see the terror fill their eyes as they start to duck, hoping that this one doesn't hit them. And it's brilliant because it puts, Nolan has said as much that his goal was to put you in the position of a soldier on the beach that day or that week, because the beach stuff actually takes place over the course of a week. If I remember correctly, it took 8 days to do a full evacuation of the troops.
Yeah, I agree. That actually, to me, is one of the most memorable teaser trailers that I've ever seen, because it would have been really easy, even if like Nolan's original vision of Dunkirk was carried out, the movie wasn't any different. It would have been very easy for like the studios to cut the trailer so that it looked more actiony than it was. But no, I mean, just that slow burn of having everyone kind of like realize, oh shit, like there is this force that is coming toward us that we are entirely powerless against, and just kind of soaking in that realization and gradually accepting it in the course of that shot. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's also done to great effect at the beginning of the film when the guy who is ostensibly our main character, British troop that we follow
in Whitehead,
who we follow for most of the film, when he returns to the beach and the Luftwaffe is coming in and attacking the beach, and we never see it. We just see the sand clouds of the artillery smacking it, and it's punctuated by the guy trying to shoot the plane, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's gone. Just gone.
Yep.
Never see what hit him. We know what hit him, but we never see it. And then, of course, after that, we cut quickly to another British soldier, just a random British soldier, say, "Where's the bloody Air Force?"
Yeah, and you can only imagine how, like, if you were in that scenario and you really are like fish in a barrel, like you would be that frustrated and despair filled too,
Yeah. And I think that also that kind of isolation is kind of apparent through all 3 segments of the film, because you think about it also from the stuff at the sea. We follow a single boat. There are hundreds of boats that end up coming to Dunkirk, but for the purposes of this film, we're focusing on one.
it was Mark Rylance.
Thank you, Mark Rylance.
Who played Mr. Dawson.
Mark Rylance gives one of the best performances of the movie. Basically, the boat stuff is the emotional weight of the movie. If you're looking for like the traditional film emotional weight, he speaks about how his generation are the ones who are dictating the war, so why should he not, try to rescue as many people as possible? We find out later that there's an emotional toll on him because he lost one of his sons who was a pilot.
Of course, is the good old Tommy Shelby, Cillian Murphy.
The boat is basically like the closest thing to like average movie characters in the sense that they have a backstory, they have more like traditional motivation in the sense that like there's like a driving purpose that they have. Whereas like Tom Hardy is basically doing his job as a man in the Air Force. Like he's not. There's no like backstory about him trying to like win back his ex-wife or something. And then with the soldiers on the beach themselves, none of those characters either have this specific arc or backstory or anything like that. They're just people trying to survive.
Yeah. And you see that because as the movie progresses, especially on the beach, we see what people are driven to when they're desperate. Hell, they're willing to toss people off that little boat that they're in just because they think that's going to stop it from sinking, even though there's a bunch of holes in it.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that you say that, Nick, because I think you worded it perfectly. And it's that you see what people are capable of, because anytime a character, other than the people in the boat, anytime a character makes a decision in this movie, it's because we don't know these characters as individuals. It's not a type of person making that decision, but it just shows what different people are capable of. And
Yeah.
actually, one of my favorite parts of the movie, because the movie is just so good, the beginning with the stretcher scene. Because it's this very cool thing where, the two basically main characters of the beach story are trying to take that gurney from the beach to the ship. And it becomes this almost like communal thing to get that stretcher to the ship, right? Because there's that part where they're trying to walk across the plank and all the soldiers nearby are like saying like, oh, like give it a try to get across. They creep across really slowly as the bombs are dropping, and it's super tense. They make it across, and the entire area like breaks into applause. But it's so well done, it doesn't feel cheesy. It just feels like this small victory and moment of humanity that like all the soldiers who are these young kids scared out of their mind can like take some solace in.
Yeah. The movie never lets up. Just from the beginning, when the few soldiers are walking through the abandoned French town, and again, they're getting shot at. We don't know by who. Obviously, we know it's the Germans, but they're just getting shot at. And from that to when the final tension break finally happens when the guy, after like being rescued from the oil and flame, he's like being dragged as the boat is going away. He gets pulled out. That's when the tension finally breaks in the movie.
Yep.
That's an hour and 40 minutes into the movie.
Here's gripe number one. Going back to like they're in the city of Dunkirk. Why does it look like it's not been bombed out? Like the Nazis, like the Germans clearly bombed Dunkirk to shit. But it looks like it still has that seaside town vibe.
That's a good point.
It was a downside to using he filmed it on location, so they filmed it in modern day Dunkirk. So part of the problem with doing that is that it's not, you can't obviously bomb out. And knowing Nolan, like we know how he likes to film movies, he probably would have paid to have the buildings bombed out and then paid to have them repaired.
Yeah, and not only that, he would have paid for like not just like normal like demolition guys. He would have paid extra top dollar to make sure it was like actually German World War II planes that fucking bombed the city, and then it was like 1940s style like Marshall Plan reconstruction that like rebuilt the city.
Yeah, so like seeing them like Dunkirk looks fine. I'm like the Nazis not go deeper into the city because it's like basically all the Allies had expeditionary force was the beach in the mole and a few other parts of the area as Dunkirk. It's like the Nazis had complete control of that area.
Maybe the Nazis in this movie were thinking ahead to the occupation, and so they were like, Dunkirk's a pretty nice little beachfront property. And so they didn't bomb it out because they knew they could rent it out to tourists after they took it over.
Oh, God. Isn't Vichy France?
What the Germans have a timeshare company now?
Yeah, and for the low cost of $300 a month, you can take part in it too.
Yeah, you can see this play out because Nolan doesn't use a lot of wide or extreme wide shots of the beach stuff, especially as it pertains to the city. He mostly keeps it on the beach. I think that's to avoid the fact that the city just, it looks nice.
To spend less time in the city, the better.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's a gripe. It's not super important because it doesn't really play into the overall theme of the film. The overall theme of the film is survival and community.
Agreed.
Another thing that kind of irked me about the film was the antagonization between English and French. even though they were both trying to get off the beach. Because remember, like the French soldier who takes the dead British soldier's uniform?
Yeah.
I think that it didn't seem true for historical accuracy's sake. The way they were kind of ganging up on the French guy in the boat,
Yeah.
it just didn't make sense. Like you're trying to have an enemy, but why make it of the French guy? You know,
Yeah.
like
I think in that instance, it's mostly to, again, show that even though these are allies and these should be together, that the stress of the situation is causing people to make rash, otherwise poor decisions that they wouldn't make if they weren't in such a crazy predicament.
yeah, I get that. But then it's just like if you look at the total amount saved, 136,000 were French.
How much total were evacuated?
The total evacuations were about it was 338,000. So out of those 338,000, 120 actually 123,000 were French soldiers.
So a little bit more than a third.
So a little bit more than a third were French troops. And you know, it wasn't like the French were all trying to leave too. Like they were trying to defend Dunkirk as well. They were defending that pocket against the Germans.
Yeah, and as you said, a lot of those French soldiers would eventually become the Free French Forces led by Charles de Gaulle, who was based in England until he was able to return to France.
That
But
makes
could
sense.
we
Yeah,
give
I mean, I guess
a mention to our boy, Harry Styles?
His first and to this point only film he's ever acted in.
Conclusion was
pretty good
out of
first
the left
film.
field. Like, you know how we like the past war movies are basically like this one guy fighting for like a greater cause, like he's fighting because ex-wife cheated on him and he needed to find a way to like, you know, avenge something. Like out of all the movies to have to portray the first sense of humanness within war, Harry Styles gets picked by Christopher Nolan to be like, here, take this role, you know. And I felt he did a decent job. I felt like it was a not a bad debut by our boy.
Yeah, seriously, if that's your first movie, it's pretty good.
One aspect of the film we haven't talked about too much yet is the air stuff. Filmed almost entirely in IMAX, which means that Christopher Nolan strapped an IMAX camera to a plane and flew behind it. I don't know if you know this, but Christopher Nolan has broken 2 IMAX cameras in his career.
Oh, really?
Jesus.
Yes, one of them on The Dark Knight, and I think the other one on Interstellar. There's only like 12 of them in existence,
Oh, Jesus, really?
and they're super expensive. And I have to imagine, like, when Christopher Nolan comes calling, IMAX just takes out a crazy insurance policy on their cameras.
Like Wimbledon taking out pandemic insurance.
Yeah, smartest thing they ever did. But the air stuff is interesting because, maybe I'm wrong, but I think Tom Hardy gives the best performance of the movie.
I think there needs to be a special award created for people who are acting with gear on their face so that they can only emote through their eyes. And Tom Hardy will win that award every time. I mean, he killed it as Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, killed it in Mad Max Fury Road, kills it here. And there's probably some other performances I'm forgetting too, but he is the ultimate being on his face guy.
He's good in Peaky Blinders, but you can see his face.
And I'm not interested. I'm sorry. I need Tom Hardy's face partially covered to get the best of him.
And, you know, his stuff is basically support. The dogfighting scenes are filmed fantastically. They always have you on the edge of your seat.
Those are the scenes that are like the closest to a normal war movie in the sense that they are basically the only parts of the movie where there's like badass, entertaining fighting going on. And because everything else is such a like good masterclass in making you feel tension and making you feel that sense of helplessness that the people both on the boats, since they don't have weapons, and on the beach have, the fact that there is that badass air fighting is complemented. Whereas if like the whole thing were just high adrenaline badass fighting, it wouldn't be as special.
Well, it's like it kind of goes to like the 3 parts: the land, the sea, and the air. Like how Christopher Nolan put the movie in 3 parts.
Yep.
And when Tom Hardy surrenders at the end, that's the only time we see even a glimpse of the German army coming in.
Yeah, that's true. That's the only time we see them.
His segment at the end is also the perfect encapsulation of the sacrifice necessary to win a war. He basically gave up himself so that the British could live on another day by getting off the beach.
Even the survivors had to make a really huge sacrifice because they've gone through the horrors of war. They've gone through these feelings of helplessness, despair. Those who made cowardly decisions, and I say that not judgmentally because you're in hell. Those who made decisions that weren't the best, they might regret it, even though they were in insanely stressful situations. So they've gone through all that. They've gone through all this suffering and torment, and then they have to go back to Britain to eat British food.
Oh, yeah, that's
gonna piss off our 4 British listeners.
Here's the thing: that the English breakfasts are amazing. Give me a full English, all day, every day. Fish and chips with curry sauce.
Yeah, but see, okay, here's my hot take. The only good British food is the British food that's been influenced by the places that they terrorize.
Oh, of course.
Right? Like, the only good British food is, like, Irish or Indian inspired.
I'll stand for the full English fry-up. Like, that is...
Yeah, David, I'm going to have to go with the fish and chips. They're fucking fantastic.
But, no, of course, like, English food is bland. Like,
they add
really...
vinegar to, like, give it flavor. How bad does your food have to be?
Well, hold on. Salt and vinegar chips are amazing.
They're all right. They're all right. But compare British food to, like, almost any other food.
Like what?
Shit, man. Like, Italian food, Mexican food, even, like, French food, any other genre. And again, especially if you take out
French food is amazing.
And again, especially if you take out the, like, good parts of British food that are taken from the places they've colonized and terrorized, and you have, like, just British food, boom, sucks ass.
It's just grog. It's like porridge.
Like beans on toast. Like, who the fuck eats that as a flavorful
meal? Yeah, we're totally gonna lose all of our British fans this week.
Oh, British fans? I'm sorry. Did you mean the Greater United Irish Republic? Man, I'm just really tearing into our British friends. I'm so sorry. God, this is so irresponsible.
We are sorry to our British, also Tottenham supporters, who...
We do not condone any of David's anti-British sentiments here.
You know what might be a good fitting punishment for me to make up for what I've said? Make me eat British food.
I'll cook up some black pudding for you.
Oh, God. That sounds awful.
I'll help the boys see if black pudding is possible. But yeah, it's just like, if you put things into perspective, Dunkirk was a failure that was turned into a victory.
Yeah, because without that, let's say they aren't able to evacuate, or they're only able to evacuate a third of what they were able to evacuate, including the French soldiers. That's a good chunk of the British military that's necessary to push onto Europe for the rest of the war.
The whole outcome of the war would have changed if the Germans decided to push into the Dunkirk pocket.
Maybe that happens, and then maybe the Germans don't need to push on to England and they can put full focus into Russia.
Yeah, and they put 100% of their fighting force there. So when they have that Western pocket secured, they can just start throwing everything at the Soviet Union. But I still think the Soviets would have outlasted the Nazis.
Yeah, there's more people. They're, again, a little more battle-tested.
Yeah, I think the Soviets and, like, U.S. still could have won, but I think the victory would not have been as complete. The way that, in the aftermath of World War II, like, the Nazi state was completely dismantled and people were, like, held accountable for war crimes. If the victory wasn't as absolute, then that stuff might not have happened to the same extent.
That makes sense. Churchill says as much. It was a colossal failure. We can't attribute, wars aren't won by evacuation.
But the speech he made, we will not surrender. They showed as much courage in evacuating.
Yeah, I actually like how they framed that speech in Dunkirk more than I enjoyed watching Gary Oldman deliver it in Darkest Hour.
Although Darkest Hour, I thought, was like peak British political drama, but it was amazing.
I never saw it.
It's good because Gary Oldman is fantastic in it, and that's
Yeah.
it.
I heard he got like nicotine poisoning for like smoking like an absurd amount of cigars every take. He got like nicotine poisoning.
Dunkirk gets rid of any of the political drama associated with Dunkirk and focuses just on the soldiers, and that's the important thing to remember about this movie. It is about the experience of war at its core. It's about terror of war, but ultimately what people can accomplish when they come together for a greater cause.
Yeah, like honestly, this movie could have been made about almost any war. I mean, like granted, the fact that it is about Dunkirk makes sense because it is this idea that like a mass evacuation can mean losing the battle but just surviving to fight another day, which Dunkirk is a perfect story for. But like you were just saying, it's not a movie about like the British versus the Nazis. It's like you said, it's about the experience of war itself.
Let's give a big shout out to the French. I know they go rather unnoticed in Dunkirk, but the total casualties at Dunkirk for the French were between 50 to 90,000.
Jesus.
They were the last stand for the soldiers to get off the beach. They were defending Dunkirk so that everyone can get evacuated.
And they did their job. And the movie just accomplishes more than anything else is, again, can't emphasize enough how on edge I was the entire film. It's on top of that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how the score plays into that as well. The constant ticking in the background of every musical cue just to let you know something's coming, something's coming, something's coming.
Yep.
That time is running out. And I know that Nolan is a weirdo when it comes to time. He has this weird fascination with it.
I guarantee you he probably took it. I mean, at least I think. Because remember that movie I kept telling you guys about, Lahain?
Yeah.
Yes.
Kazovitz does that, like the ticking, the clocks. Like, even though it's supposed to be suspenseful, it's just the everyday life of those three guys. So, like, Kazovitz did that, and I think that Nolan could have been.
I mean, he's nothing if not a student of film.
Yeah, and I guarantee you probably got it from other forms as well, not just that. But I heard it also in Lahain, so that was the similar. This is the clock ticking suspense.
Yeah. So Dunkirk is basically the perfect encapsulation of trying to capture a historical moment and using the medium, basically every aspect of the medium in every way possible, under very subtle acting performances paired with amazing cinematography that gives you the scope of the war, but at the same time shrinking you down to where you're stuck there, while using the music and everything, the sound effects, to create terror.
And I think the pacing really helps too, because one of the things that's really important in a story is you want, like, for lack of a better way of putting it, you want a symphony, right? Where like there are the highs and lows. I forget the symphonic terms. It's like crescendos and
Crescendos and like innuendos and
well, whatever the right word is, right? Like you can't have like one pace. You can't have like constant action for an hour and a half or for 2 hours, but you also can't have it be like low key. And I think what Nolan shows in Dunkirk is that he knows exactly when to start the ticking clock and when to make things tense. And then he also knows when to kind of like release the pressure a little bit, right? And have everything slow down. And there's, a little bit of time for safety and recuperation and for us to breathe. Like when they first get onto the ship, right? And you think that they're going to be safe for at least, a reasonable amount of time. And so they're on the ship. The French guy stays outside while the other guys go into the hull. But of course, it's bombed and starts to sink again. And so you have this really good continuing shifting of tensions. And that makes the tense parts better. Whereas again, if it were like a high octane adrenaline filled thing the entire time, then that's like one setting and you would get used to it after a while.
Yeah. Those scenes too where like they're underwater and like, oh, he's gonna smash in between the water and the ship. You're like, no, move.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And also, like, you don't really know the identities of these soldiers as well. That plays into it. Like,
they almost don't even matter, like, as individuals.
So I think what makes it brilliant is that we don't know the backstories of all these people.
Yeah, because in war, you generally don't. You're just kind of thrust into a situation. And we know that all these people have their own story with their own something unique about them, but it's not important because at the moment, they're just one of many. And to focus on one person would be a disservice to the other 300,000 people who are there.
Yeah.
I think what this movie is really about, and we were kind of touching on this a little bit before, but it really is about people and not individual characters. And so, Nick, like you were saying before, like there's all these acts of heroism and also these sort of uglier acts, like we were talking about, how they were trying to like throw out the French person because they were just so scared and terrified. And it's really not like meant to reflect, oh, like this one specific soldier is a bad person. Let's explore that. It's like, oh no, like in times of like extreme peril and terror, some people are going to make bad decisions, some people are going to be brave, and some people are not going to be brave or cruel. They're just trying to survive and they're just trying to keep their heads down. And I think that in some ways, I think this movie is almost more human than even some of Nolan's other movies that try to be kind of like more emotional and to talk more about like intimate things like love. Like I think Nolan as like a creative person is better at expressing bigger things about people more so than he is expressing like little human like emotions and things like that. Like he's better at being grandiose than he is at being like intimate, I think. And this movie really plays into those strengths.
Yeah, just to wrap it up, it's also a movie that reminds you that the casualties of war come from anywhere. Like the only death we see in the movie, like that hits us, is the boy on the ship, whose name I'm pulling up right now.
George, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, George, yeah.
Yeah, George, a person who shouldn't be there, like all these kids, they shouldn't be there, who wants to help because he wants to help, is put in a bad situation and pays the price for it, but gets to be a hero at the end anyway.
Yeah.
These kind of wars are made up of tiny little moments with certain people who you'll never remember their name, who came together to make something good happen.
Well, I just think it kind of goes back to what David was talking about, like the humanness of characters. Like the most human character we probably face is Cillian Murphy.
Totally suffering from shell shock.
Like he's constantly telling Mr. Dawson, "Why the fuck are we going back to Dunkirk? We need to go back." And he can just tell his face. He's like, "Dude, like I'm not going back. I'm not going back." And when George kind of steps in, he pushes him off the ledge of the boat, hits the little
Yeah.
stucks out. His head's obliterated. Like, yeah, we see that. I think the most humanness of that is Cillian Murphy's character.
Yeah, because Cillian Murphy's character isn't a bad guy. He's been through something, and he doesn't want to go through it again, and he's letting that manifest. That's the casualties of war aren't just the people who die; it's how they're affected by it if they do survive.
Yeah. And even the people who do die, like not all of them are killed in a blaze of glory in a like crazy gunfight.
In a very glorious manner.
Yeah.
For me, Dunkirk is the way we should be doing war movies going forward. And 1917 kind of did that. If Saving Private Ryan is the ultimate expression of the war film as a band of brothers coming together for a good cause, Dunkirk is the ultimate expression of the war film as it pertains to highlighting war when it's not at its sexiest.
When your back's against the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also give a shout out to Sir Kenneth Branagh. We totally forgot about him.
Yeah, he kind of helps whenever, like, there are a lot of parts in the movie where there's no dialogue spoken.
Wait, for people who don't know who that is, we should say the role that he plays.
He's the captain? Is he the captain?
I think he's the captain of it all. He's the main man.
Yeah.
And he's also Gilderoy Lockhart in the Chamber of Secrets.
He's good because whenever we have long aspects of no dialogue and we're just kind of watching things happen, we'll return to him and he'll start summing up some of the things that are going on, as well as give us updates as to any incoming help that might be happening.
Yeah, and I think he also does a good job of like he delivers it with such a like fire that it doesn't even feel like basically like an information dump because he says it the way an officer would, and he says it with this like nobility that it also adds character to him.
Yeah. And also, he, along with Tom Hardy, are the two people who end up sacrificing themselves at the end. He willingly stays, like Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy gives himself up, and he also willingly stays to make a good showing for the French that are stuck there.
Yeah, to help out the brothers, the les frères, the brothers
So,
in French.
Oh, okay.
final thoughts on the movie?
I just think that Dunkirk has set the precedent for I think how war movies are going to be moving forward, and it receives such good reception. I think also it's what the people want as well. You know, we see these acts of heroism, but I feel like people like authenticity. People like the real. People don't like the fake. We can sniff it out from a mile away. Like, I think just it got such a good reception. I think it's one of my personal favorite war movies of all time is just the humanity. It felt so authentic.
I think for me, I definitely agree with what Cameron said. I think it's just such a new and interesting way to approach war as a subject of a movie. And there's a lot of movies that have really interesting ideas, but I think this movie is the best combination of like a really ambitious goal and just accomplishing those goals with really good film craft. I personally think the 2010s was like an incredible decade for movies. I think it's better than both the first decade of the 2000s as well as the 90s. I mean, I really do think it's one of the best decades ever for film, period. And in such a decade with so many great movies, Dunkirk definitely makes my top 10. And actually, fun fact, Quentin Tarantino has Dunkirk as his second favorite movie of the 2010s.
That makes sense. Dunkirk is the movie that filmmakers and film nerds will be talking about for years because it's basically, hey, you want to learn how to tell a story using just visual, then you're going to want to watch Dunkirk. Dunkirk's also a throwback to a movie like All Quiet on the Western Front, which also is a film about war, but also highlights the tolls of war, not just in death, but how it affects people.
And how terrible a thing nationalism is.
Yeah. Dunkirk is one of my favorite movies. You guys were there. I was pushing hard for it to win Best Picture. I still think it was the best movie that year. I know Shape of Water ended up winning, but Shape of Water sucks.
Yeah, for me, I think even though Get Out was my favorite movie that year, I would not have been the least bit mad if Dunkirk won, because Dunkirk is incredible.
It highlighted how good of a storyteller Christopher Nolan is. And honestly, this is how war movies should be shown going forward. War is horror, war is terror, war is not sexy. There are so many aspects that go into a war, and we don't think about them, and we don't think about how people are affected by it just days after an event happened.
It's just like Dunkirk is going to be the standard. Dunkirk is the standard. All these new war movies are going to come out are going to be based on how it was compared to Dunkirk.
Yeah.
It set a new standard. It set a new mode. And just the way it was shot, the story that was told, the severity of it all. And I think just it's also the way the Brits see war too. It's deep-seated in their conscious memory as well.
Kind of like their version of the Alamo almost.
Sort of like, yeah, it hits into the British war memory. Because we see like World War One, you know, if you travel to England, it's like Armistice Day and November 11th, it's on the public conscience. Seeing like Dunkirk, it's like seeing a manifestation of World War One all over again. At least to the severity of it. But I'd say that it captures the British war conscious.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, it's just a really great film. Masterpieces don't come around too often. They're masterpieces for a reason, but Dunkirk is a legit masterpiece.
Yeah, it's one of the best movies of the 2010s for just showing how you can use the medium of film to just really powerfully convey a story.
And really powerfully convey history. It's a really good way to introduce Dunkirk as a part of World War II to people. Like, yeah, this is what happened. You should see this movie, and then we're going to talk about all the other stuff that the movie didn't get into.
It's a subject that Americans don't know about. Very few Americans know about Dunkirk. We talk about D-Day. We talk about Pearl Harbor. We talk about events that we were directly involved in the war.
Hmm.
But if you tell someone about Dunkirk in the street before the movie came out, they're like, what's that?
Yeah.
And just to highlight how people were willing to take it in, this is a movie without any real major star power or anything like that, and it still made over $500 million.
You know, that does
I mean,
make
there
me
was
want
star
to.
power.
Well, there is.
There was, but there wasn't like that A-list actor that helps put a movie over the top. Although we are kind of moving away from the era of the A-lister.
I also think that like this movie is a really good example, specifically this movie's success. I think it's a really good example that like condescending view that people like only want something like sexy and adrenaline pounding, which I love super cool movies too that are like that. So I'm not talking down on those, but there's like this condescending view that like, oh, you know, the public only wants those kinds of movies. And I think this is, you know, a good example of how you can give people movies with a broader range of ideas and approaches to a story, and people will respond well to them. Same also with Get Out. Same to like a lot of other movies during the decade that people would not have guessed would have become really big breakout hits, but then they end up doing very well. You know, I think that reflects really well on like the movie going public when a lot of people are generally like, oh, well, you know, most people are idiots.
So yeah, Dunkirk's a 10 out of 10.
I would agree.
So just as we wrap this up, a quick programming note. I know that we were going to say that our next episode was going to be about history of labor strikes in sports, but David, do you want to tell them what you guys are planning next as that episode's pushed back an episode?
Yeah, so our next episode is actually going to be something Cameron came up with it. So shout out to Cameron. It's going to be about the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. So a lot of people obviously know about the U.S. war with Vietnam, but a lot of people don't know about what happened right before. And so it was actually the French who had colonized and taken over Vietnam. There was war between the two of them. Cameron and I are going to really delve into that. Nick will also be on the episode, but he'll just be kind of like the observer of everything and point out like what he finds interesting and everything like that. So Cameron and I will really be digging into the meat of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu.
When we talk about Vietnam, we talk about direct U.S. involvement, early 60s to like 1975. But really, we need to see that Vietnam as a 20-year conflict, 20, 30-year conflict that the U.S. was involved in way before what we know as the Vietnam War. And it's about time we got into some decolonization. About time we got into some independence movements coming in. And
Agreed.
It's going to be a good one. I feel like this is a topic that most Americans should know because it wasn't just we showed up in Vietnam willy-nilly. We know this is a bigger 30-year conflict of decolonization and freedom. We need to see it in the greater picture as opposed to only our direct part in it.
As always, if you have any suggestions for future episodes, we're really, really willing to listen. We do plan on having like a audience choice, like where they get to pick an episode for us. So if you have a suggestion, reach out to us on any of our social media pages. That's Facebook or Twitter at a mouthful of his one.
Check out our Instagram page. Same thing.
Yeah. Or you can email us at a mouthfulofhistory@gmail.com.
We are pretty quick to respond. Again, shout out to all of our faithful listeners. Shout out to those who always contribute to our posts. You are greatly appreciated, more than you'll ever know.
Yep.
Follow us on Apple Podcasts. Give us a review. It also means the world to us. Follow us on Spotify. We're pretty much on every site.
Yeah, so whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts, a good review would be super helpful. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube channel if you are on YouTube a lot.
Are we missing anybody?
Harry Styles. Shout out to the man.
Also, thanks to Caroline for listening in on making sure that we sound good this time.
Yes, thank you, Caroline.
All right, guys. This was fun. Check out Dunkirk if you haven't already. If you haven't, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, why did you listen to this
whoa, man, that is harsh. That is, what the fuck is wrong? Like,
And if you have any movie suggestions, also push those our way. We will probably have another one, in a few episodes.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
See you later, everybody.